November 17th, solving basic equations with roots and radicals. When we have a problem like x squared plus 1, if we think about the order of operations, parentheses, exponents, that's where this squared comes in. So what that means, just how we would subtract before we divide, we subtract before we take the square root. When we're left with x squared equals 9, what we do is we take the square root of both sides. That's how you cancel out the squared. Think about 2 squared, which is the same thing as 2 times 2. We get 4, right? What if you take the square root of 4? Well, now we're back to 2. These two things cancel each other out. The square root of 2 squared is just 2. Back to this problem. The square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. Because 3 times 3 is 9, but also negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Let's look at some more examples. When we divide by 4 on both sides, we get x squared equals 16. Then when we take the square root of both sides, we get x equals plus or minus 4. If we add 12 to both sides, we get 4x squared is equal to 16. When we divide by 4, we get x squared equals 4. Taking the square root of both sides, we end up with x is equal to plus or minus 2. On the right, we now are looking at square roots. So it's a very similar process, but instead of taking the square root, we square things. The order remains the same. We subtract the 2 to cancel out the addition first, and we have the square root of x is equal to 5. And here, we square both sides. And on the left, they cancel each other out, and we get 25 on the right. We divide both sides by 12. We get the square root of x is equal to 3. We square both sides. X is equal to 9. We divide by negative 5 on both sides. The square root of x is equal to positive 4. We square both sides. We end up with x is equal to 16. Let's move on to the back and try a few more. Here we subtract 3 from both sides. We get 2 root x is equal to 12. We divide by 2. We get root x is equal to 6. When we square both sides, we end up with x is equal to 36. Moving down, I subtract 6 from both sides. I have 6x squared is equal to 54. When I divide both sides by 6, x squared is equal to 9. When I take the square root of both sides, x can either be positive 3 or negative 3. Heading down, I subtract 8 from both sides. I now have negative 10x squared is equal to negative 160. To cancel out that negative 10, I have to divide. So I'm left with x squared is equal to 16. When I take the square root of both sides, I can get a positive 4 or a negative 4. When I subtract 5 from both sides, I have a negative 144 is equal to a negative 9x squared. I divide by a negative 9. I get a positive 16. When I take the square root of both sides, I end up with plus or minus 4 is equal to x. Minus 4 from both sides, negative 36 is equal to negative 9x squared. Divide both sides by a negative 9. 4 is equal to x squared. When I take the square root of both sides, plus or minus 2 is equal to x. Minus 8 from both sides, negative 4 is equal to negative root x. I divide out a negative 1 to get rid of that negative there. And I have 4 is equal to root x. When I square both sides, I end up with 16 is equal to x.